We've already done the big, large studies where we look at how running back age impacts their fantasy football value and the production we can expect in that season. Well, what I want to do is I want to dive a little bit deeper because I don't think we've ever seen this many old running backs getting drafted in fantasy football drafts. Whether it's Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, or even those guys that are going at the very end of drafts, such as Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, I think it's going to be useful to have a reasonable expectation of their ceiling and floor this next year. So what I decided to do is I went over to the RotoViz screener, very similar to what we did with rookie and year two wide receivers, and we looked at comps for running backs throughout history that had similar seasons at the same age. Now, an example of this will be going over to Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry had his age 28-year-old season in 2022. So we went ahead and we took Derrick Henry's PPR points per game, we took his rushing yards per game and his receiving yards per game, expanded that window by 20% higher and 20% lower in each statistical category, and looked at all running backs that were able to have similar seasons in their age 28 season, and then what they did at age 29. I think going back to the year 2000 is important because we want an extremely large sample. That way we can have every outcome possible. Now, starting off with Derrick Henry, this is a running back that last season was great. Okay, Derrick Henry has had 3 straight years now as a top 5 running back in fantasy. Derrick Henry has actually continued to expand his role as a pass catcher, which is arguably the most exciting thing about Derrick Henry because we know he has red flags. It's a running back that's most likely going to be in a very bad offense this next season. This is a running back that's now going to be 29 years old. You're going to have to start catching the ball if that's your profile. But nonetheless, he had 121 total yards per game last year, which is absolutely crazy to think about. So as we go through and as we put in these thresholds, you're going to see that there were 5 other running backs outside of Derrick Henry that were able to do this in their age 28 season since the year 2000. You had Arian Foster back in 2014. You had LaShawn McCoy in 2016. You had Curtis Martin in 2001. You had Marshawn Lynch in 2014 and DeMarco Murray. Remember when he had to split the backfield with Derrick Henry back in 2016. Now, what's very interesting is we can track their points per game for each one of these running backs at age 28 and 29. Arian Foster went down from about 21 points per game to about 20. That's not a big drop off. But what is a considerable drop off is the fact that Arian Foster actually gets injured in this season. Arian Foster only plays 4 games, and we know that's what you're going to have to be worried about with these older running backs. Now, in the case of LaShawn McCoy goes from averaging about 20 points per game down to about 16 and a half. So you see that drop off. Curtis Martin goes from averaging about 19 points per game down to about 15 points per game. So we see that drop off. Marshawn Lynch goes from 19 points per game down to 12. And at the same time, he is not able to stay healthy through the course of the entire season. And then DeMarco Murray goes from about 18 and a half points per game down to about 11 and a half points per game. So what's very interesting is every single one of these running backs that had that comparable season to Derrick Henry at this age got worse in their age 29 season. Now, does this mean you should not draft Derrick Henry? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay away from Derrick Henry, right? Because Derrick Henry was the running back 4 in fantasy last year. And just because he's most likely not going to be a top 3 running back, top 4 running back in fantasy this next season, doesn't mean he still can't be a decent pick. It's just primarily going to be dependent on the platform you are drafting on and the expectations that everybody else has for him. Because right now, if we head over to Underdog Fantasy Drafts, you're getting Derrick Henry at the beginning of round 3, and Derrick Henry's not being drafted as a top 4 running back. Derrick Henry's being drafted as the running back 8. So it's already priced in a bit that Derrick Henry should get worse from where he was this past season. Now, of course, if we're going to go over and look at where he's being drafted, like in a casual redraft league, it will be a little bit different over there on ESPN. Keep in mind, you would make the argument that Derrick Henry is much more valuable on ESPN than Underdog because you want Derrick Henry in that half PPR format rather than that full PPR league. There, Derrick Henry is a late round 1 selection, and there you have Derrick Henry going about as the running back 5, running back 6. So what I would be looking to do with Derrick Henry is if you're playing in that full PPR format in your casual redraft league, you probably shouldn't take a 29-year-old running back going into a season where his offense is probably going to be pretty bad in the first round. Yeah, I'd avoid Derrick Henry there. But if you're in those underdog drafts and you're able to get Derrick Henry in round 3.5 PPR format, I think that's a fine price point, and I'm completely fine going ahead and drafting him. What's also very interesting is if you go look at the player props right now that you have on Underdog Fantasy, they have Derrick Henry for more rushing yards this next season than any other running back. They have Derrick Henry for over 1,200 rushing yards for his player prop line, and that's important to note, just the projections that they have for this next season. Now, going over to our next running back, we're going to be looking at the number 1 running back off the board with Christian McCaffrey. Now, obviously, CMC is very difficult to find comps for, right? I mean, with Christian McCaffrey, he's a running back that is elite based off his receiving down usage, but you actually have a few running backs looking similar in their age 26 season since the year 2000. You have Austin Ekeler in 2021, you have Tiki Barber in 2001, and you have Alvin Kamara in 2021 as well. Now, obviously, we recently remember Austin Ekeler and Alvin Kamara and how that played out. Ekeler actually managed to be a league-winning option for people this past year, especially where he won someone $1 million on Underdog. Now, you're going over and looking at Tiki Barber. He went from about 17 points per game up to about 21. The only guy to really fall off here was Alvin Kamara, and that fall wasn't insane by any stretch of the imagination. Alvin Kamara only fell from about 18 points per game down to about 15. So in reality, if you're looking at this range of outcomes for CMC, there's a reason he's being drafted as the running back 1 off the board. I mean, at 27 years old, you're not worried about some massive fall off as we are going to see with some of these other running backs, right? Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to look at Austin Ekeler, a little bit older than CMC. Austin Ekeler going into his age 28 season. Ekeler coming off a season where he was the not only number 1 running back in fantasy, but the number 1 overall flex player. There was not a single player that scored more fantasy points than Austin Ekeler outside of the quarterback position. Now, he did this with his involvement as a pass catcher. We just recently talked about this and that I'm a little bit worried with the addition of Quentin Johnston based off the historical splits we've seen with and without Keenan Allen, with and without Mike Williams. In games where both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are healthy and you have 2 top receiving options at wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers, they just simply don't throw the ball to Austin Ekeler nearly as much as they do when one of those guys are out. So now that you have a 3rd wide receiver and you're really never going to see the situation where Joshua Palmer has to be the wide receiver 1, I do think the involvement as a pass catcher goes down just a bit for Ekeler. And like we said, I mean, this is a running back that's going into his age 28 season. We have a ton of examples of running backs that were actually able to comp to Austin Ekeler here at this age. You had Curtis Martin in the year 2000. You had David Johnson in 2018. You had Deuce Staley, 2002. Lamont Jordan, 2005. Liddell Betts in 2006. And then obviously Austin Ekeler this past year. Now, if you're looking at every single one of these running backs, they all have one thing in common. Every single one of these running backs got worse going into their age 28 season. I'm not saying Ekeler is destined to have this same fate, but you go to Curtis Martin, 19 points per game down to about 18.8, not a big fall off. But then after that, David Johnson goes from about 16 points per game down to 12. Deuce Staley at 16 points per game down to 10. Lamont Jordan goes from about 21 points per game to 8. Liddell Betts goes from 15 points per game to 5. Now, am I expecting Austin Ekeler to average 5, 6, 7? And no, we're not expecting him to be in the single digits for fantasy points this next year. But just historically speaking, once you get to this age at the running back position, especially with those red flags that we previously mentioned with Austin Ekeler, it's very difficult to assume that he's going to come out here and just be a juggernaut like he was the year prior. I do expect Ekeler to fall back just a bit, but it's all about the price point on where you're taking him, right? I mean, if we're looking at casual ESPN leagues right now, Austin Ekeler is going as the 2nd player off the board. I'm probably not going to be taking him there. I'm not going to be chasing the points at that spot. I would rather have CMC, Jamar Chase, even Travis Kelce if it's a casual ESPN redraft league. Now, if you're going over to where he's being drafted on Underdog, he is being drafted as the 8th guy off the board. He's being drafted as the running back 2, well behind Christian McCaffrey. And honestly, in my mind, that's about where he belongs. So very similar to what we were saying with Derrick Henry. I think the people on Underdog are already kind of pricing this in, whereas in your casual redraft league, he's going to be an avoid there. If you're going over looking at his player props, they have him for 4.5 receiving touchdowns, 8.5 rushing touchdowns. So, 13 total touchdowns is a lot. And they also have him for almost 800 rushing yards and 600 receiving yards. So, the projections love Austin Ekeler. But of course, real quick, quick side note, if you want to get into one of those underdog drafts, which we are doing every single day on the live stream, we're not going to miss a single day until 2024. Or you want to go check out any of those player props that we're seeing on the screen in this video, you can go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. The link is in the description as well as the comment section. And if you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get my 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com. And hell, it's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the season. Just some extra drafts for you to have fun. I mean, that's how I drafted over 700 teams and won $150,000 last year on Underdog. But now let's go over to our next guy. Joe Mixon is a running back that is very polarizing this next season, right? And we have a lot of guys that look like Joe Mixon through the years. I mean, Mark Ingram, 2015, Thomas Jones, 2004, Leonard Fournette, Alvin Kamara, both in 2021, Melvin Gordon in 2019, Chris Johnson in 2011, and Knowshon Moreno in 2013. Now, he's going into his age 27 season. And what's interesting with this profile is it's very similar to what we saw with some of these other running backs in that every single running back here gets worse. Mark Ingram goes from about 17 points per game as a 26-year-old down to 15 points per game the following season. Thomas Jones, 17 points to 15 points. Leonard Fournette, 18 points to 15 points. Alvin Kamara, 18 points to 15 points. Melvin Gordon, 15 points to 14 points. Chris Johnson, slightly worse. The only guy to see a massive fall off was Knowshon Moreno. So maybe you can take this one of two ways, right? You're not getting better going into your age 27 season if you're Joe Mixon. But at the same time, the dip that we see with all these backs is just 10 to 20%. It's not like they're falling off a complete cliff unless they are Knowshon Moreno. So going over and looking at where he's being drafted, I mean, right now, if you're looking at casual ESPN drafts, I mean, Joe Mixon currently is the running back 12 off the board. He's going in the middle of the third round. Whereas if you're going to go ahead and look at where he's being drafted on underdog drafts, he's actually the running back 15, and there he's going at the beginning of the fifth round. So I hate to say it, but it looks like just casual ESPN drafters aren't really baking in the risk that you have with some of these ages. So I'd probably be looking to avoid Joe Mixon in your casual redraft league. If you want to take him, underdog is probably the spot to do so. Now, Aaron Jones, I was surprised to see is going into his age 29 season. Aaron Jones been primarily flat over the past 3 years in terms of his overall fantasy points per game. I mean, he's gotten slightly worse with his total yards per game. It's just all over the place. Really, the only thing that you're looking at in the straight decline is going to be his target share in this Green Bay Packers offense. Is it a little concerning that he's not seeing as many targets as he did in years prior? Now, if we're going to look at the running backs that have comped to him historically, you had Jamal Charles in 2014. Now, Jamar Charles, he actually got better going into his age 29 season, which is just crazy to see, but he's freaking Jamal Charles. Yeah, Jamal Charles in 2014, and his points per game actually got a little bit better, but what you really have to point out is the fact that he only played 5 games. It's hard to stay healthy if you're a running back in your age 29 season. The next guy, Jamal Anderson, he couldn't stay healthy either. He only played 3 games. The guy that could stay healthy the entire season in Steven Jackson played all 16, but he did decline going from about 15 points per game down to 12.5. You had Larry Johnson declining as well from 16 points to about 11. You had Fred Jackson declining going from about 13.5 to 11. You had Chester Taylor declining going from about 13 to 10. You had Joique Bell declining going from 13.5 to 8. You had Chris Johnson going from about 15.5 to 7. That's where you saw him drop off a cliff. And you had Derek McFadden also dropping off a cliff, going from about 12.5 to 4.5. But in reality, he just didn't stay healthy, only played 3 games. And Raheem Mostert here as well. And Raheem Mostert couldn't stay healthy and only played 1 game. So yeah, not looking great for Aaron Jones. Really depends on where you're drafting him, right? I mean, if we're going to go through and look at these underdog drafts, Aaron Jones going as the running back 17 in the middle of round 5. If you're looking at casual redraft leagues, Aaron Jones is going at the end of the 3rd round as the running back 15. He has the same ADP as Najee Harris. He's right behind Ramondre Stevenson. So no, if you're in your casual redraft league, don't draft Aaron Jones. Take Ramondre, take Najee, hell, even take Jahmyr Gibbs, take a younger option. If you're in those underdog drafts, I'm honestly still not even drafting Aaron Jones much in the middle of the 5th round, just in comparison. Like, I'd rather take like Kenneth Walker in that range. So yeah, I mean, I really haven't been drafting much Aaron Jones at all this year. Now, Dalvin Cook is someone that obviously we have no idea what the situation will be this next season. It's a running back that is the running back 25 in your casual ESPN leagues. He is the running back 27 in those underdog drafts. And with Dalvin, I mean, he did take a massive step back this past season, and he's been on the straight decline. It doesn't matter if you're looking at his fantasy finish from a per game perspective, straight decline. Carries per game, straight decline. Targets per game, straight decline. Yards per game, straight decline. With Dalvin, it has not been pretty. Now, if we're going to go ahead and try to find some comps here, I mean, we can go through and look at some guys that actually were able to get better going into their age 28 season. You had Marshawn Lynch, Mark Ingram, Reggie Bush. I mean, you even had Chris Johnson. You had a lot of players that were actually able to get better going into age 28. I mean, if we're looking at the guys that fell off, I mean, Ahmad Green fell off here in this season. Chester Taylor did, Chris Ivory, Joseph Adaya. But in reality, I mean, across the board, it's kind of neutral with Dalvin Cook in this overall profile where you're getting involved as a receiver, but as well getting that rushing volume. So it's interesting to see that Dalvin Cook is right now being priced as if you're going to see the massive fall off with him no longer in Minnesota, which is obviously still a realistic possibility. But I mean, based on the historical data, I don't think we have to worry about him at his age. Now, going over to James Conner, age 28, you're going to see something similar. I mean, you're kind of across the board, right? Arian Foster managed to get better in his age 28 season. Mark Ingram got better. Reggie Bush got better. Warwick Dunn stayed the same. Aaron Jones stayed the same back in 2021. Deuce McAllister declined a bit. I mean, if we're looking at the guys that fell off the map, Michael Bush in 2011, Carlos Hyde 2017, you had David Johnson here falling off as well. So James Conner, I don't necessarily think that age is what we're going to be concerned about with him. It's more so going to be the offense that you have with the Arizona Cardinals. Now, going over to a running back that I want to just try to convince myself that it's okay that I've been drafting. Like, it's getting harder and harder by the day. Now, of course, I've only been drafting on Underdog, so my price point is a little bit better than what you're going to see in like a casual redraft league. Right now, Alvin Kamara is the running back 34 in those Underdog drafts, and he's going after pick 100. If you're looking at your casual ESPN draft, Alvin Kamara is the running back 28. I mean, hell, he's going at pick 81. So it's just two completely different price points, right? But with Alvin Kamara, he's coming off a season where he was the running back 13. You are seeing a decline with his overall touchdowns, but we know touchdowns are the most volatile statistic from a year-to-year perspective. So I'm kind of willing to bet that maybe these will bounce back. Now, obviously, we have to talk about the suspension. If you had not had the chance to watch the video with the lawyer we recently put out, I'd recommend it. I can't speak on the possibility. What he told us is more likely than not, Alvin Kamara will be looking at a 6-game suspension at some point this season. That's the takeaway that I had from the video. But what's also very concerning is every running back that's looked like Alvin Kamara here, whether that's Devonta Freeman in 2019, Lev Bell in 2019, Deuce Staley in 2002, every single one of these guys fell off a cliff. Staley, 16 points per game down to 10. Devonta Freeman, 14.5 points per game down to 7. Lev Bell, 14.5 points per game down to 6. So I don't know. Now, going over to some running backs that just simply are not being drafted, and I've also convinced myself they are decent pickups in the very end of Underdog drafts here. Leonard Fournette comps to only bust. Like, Leonard Fournette has Joique Bell, Devonta Freeman, and Lev Bell. All these guys were anywhere from about 6 points per game to 13.5 points per game the following year. Kareem Hunt has Darren McFadden, Rashad Jennings, CJ Spiller, Artois Piner, I don't know how to say that, and Malcolm Brown, hook 'em horns. They were from about 4 points per game to 12. So those backs that I've been convincing myself are intriguing to go through and grab, including Ezekiel Elliott, who has Jamal Lewis is like the best comp. And then outside of that, Sean Green does nothing. Benjarvis Green Ellis does nothing. I've been convinced myself that these guys have some upside at the end of drafts, but maybe I am wrong about that. I probably am, but I hope this video was useful. If it was, please let me know down there in the comment section. Of course, if I can do anything for you, don't be afraid to reach out and let me know. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to go get in a fantasy football draft with me today, if you want to go check out any of those player props on this video, and go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. You can find that link in the description. You can find it in the comment section. When you sign up for Underdog, they'll match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. And with promo code FLOCK, not only are you going to get the deposit match, but you also get my 2023 fantasy football rankings, as well as a free trial to flockfantasy.com. It's best ball, so you're not replacing your main fantasy football league with it. It's just more fun on the side. But that's all I have for you. I really appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope I get to see you in the live stream later today.